I noticed something strange about my son's wife, and especially her mother, Nancy. It really struck me on my son, Ken, and daughter-in-law, Nancy's wedding day. She suddenly tried to close the distance between us, but then would make odd, inconsistent remarks. She frequently asked about my plans and routines. What could she be thinking? Nancy even suggested that we live together. I figured if she disliked me, she wouldn't ask for that, so maybe she was just a little off with the boundaries and simply wanted to become family. I felt that rejecting her outright would be a waste of her effort, so I began living with my son and his wife. Ken was thrilled about it, so I agreed, even though I couldn't understand his wife's real intentions. One day, I came home without them noticing. I saw Nancy video chatting with her mother in the living room.
So, tomorrow morning is fine, just leave it to me. Okay, let's hope it starts working soon.
Hearing this, I felt chills run down my spine, and I quietly stepped back to the entrance. Then I hurried to the police station. My name is Irene James, and I just turned 60. While I'm grateful for reaching this age in good health, I sometimes feel a bit lonely without a partner to share this with. My husband passed away 20 years ago while he was at work. At the time, our son Ken was still in elementary school. Ken was too young to understand the sudden loss. That morning, I had walked to the door to say, "Have a good day," like always, but my husband had already left in a rush without saying goodbye. I had no idea it would be our last parting. Even now, 20 years later, I sometimes dream of that morning. I go to the sunny entryway and no one is there. Oh, he's already gone, I think, disappointed. I feel like I could still stop him if I ran fast enough, but as I try to step outside of my dream, my feet are heavy and won't move. Then the phone rings loudly and I receive the terrible news of his accident. I have often wished I could redo that morning. My husband worked at a printing factory. The machines were always running, so safety checks were a daily requirement. But people have off days. Their concentration can waver based on how they're feeling. Machines, too, can malfunction unexpectedly. Unfortunately, on that day, both my husband's attention and the machine's function failed at the same time. He was caught in a tragic accident, an unfortunate turn of events that he couldn't avoid. When an accident or illness happens while someone is on the job, it's classified as a work-related accident or workers' compensation. I was able to receive compensation from the company due to a lack of sufficient safety protocols. The company admitted they'd failed in their responsibility to provide a safe work environment, so we filed a claim. My husband's colleague had also made an operational error, so the company was held responsible for that as well. They had a duty to train employees and ensure safe working conditions. The workers' compensation alone wouldn't have been enough. In a way, I think fighting for compensation helped me cope with my grief. I received cruel anonymous letters calling me greedy for pursuing the money. Some letters even labeled me a money-hungry widow. I always figured these messages came from people connected to the company, but nothing could be worse than losing my husband, so I continued forward, knowing I had a right to this compensation. The funds weren't just for me. They were for the son my husband left behind. With the compensation along with a wrongful death settlement, I was able to provide for my son's future. We received one of the highest settlements possible, partly because Ken was still so young. Some people expressed envy over the money, but no amount could bring my husband back. I would have given up every cent if it meant he could come home again, but that was impossible. With Ken needing me, I couldn't afford to let grief consume me. I returned to full-time work and relied on the funds for daily stability. Ken grew up strong and healthy. Sometimes he'd wistfully ask, "Mom, could I ever have a brother or sister?" Those moments hurt the most. I did all I could to ensure that Ken had a life free from want. When Ken finally reached adulthood, I felt a deep sense of relief. I had made it my mission to raise Ken well in his father's absence, and I'd stayed healthy for him. Ken had grown into a kind, compassionate man.
"Mom, when I get married, let's live together,"
he'd say. "What are you talking about?" I laughed. "Your future wife wouldn't be thrilled with that." I was happy, but didn't take him seriously. But Ken insisted, saying he'd choose someone who wouldn't mind. "Well, if you live nearby, I'd be happy," I told him. "But we don't need to live together. I can take care of myself for now."
"If it makes you happy, that's good enough for me,"
he replied with a smile that would make his father proud. I hoped he'd turn that kindness toward his future partner someday. As it turned out, Ken did meet someone special sooner than I expected. Just 2 years into his job, he introduced me to the woman he hoped to marry. Her name was Sarah, and Ken said he wanted me to get to know her well. He explained that marriage was still in the future, but he wanted me to meet her early.
Ken, you really love your mom, don't you?
I wondered if my close relationship with Ken might be intimidating. Sarah seemed sweet, and I was relieved to see Ken happy. Sarah then shared something about her own background that made me pause.
Actually, my mother raised me alone too.
She explained that her father had abandoned the family after an affair. Ken added that he felt an instant connection with Sarah because of their similar upbringings.
My mom is a bit lonely, so if we become family, I hope we can all be close.
Though I was surprised at her forwardness, Ken looked thrilled, and I couldn't help but feel happy for him. Ken was so dedicated to making things work, and I could tell he was already planning a future with her. By the time Ken turned 29, he and Sarah were ready to get married. At the wedding, I met Sarah's mother, Nancy, for the first time. She was about my age, but carried herself with an odd, unsettling charm. Nancy seemed strangely seductive for someone our age. What truly surprised me, though, was that not a single relative from Sarah's side attended the wedding.
My parents eloped, so our family wasn't exactly thrilled.
But wasn't your father so in love with your mother? I asked.
Yes, but he still ended up leaving us,
she replied with a laugh. Elopement in itself wasn't all that shocking, but I wondered why it had caused such a rift. I thought perhaps Nancy's husband had been particularly scandalous, or that she had gone against family expectations. As I was lost in thought, Nancy approached me with a large bottle of wine in hand.
Nice to meet you, Jane. Thank you for everything you've done for my daughter.
She walked toward me gracefully with a mysterious smile and placed her hand lightly on my shoulder.
It's so nice to finally meet another single mom.
Her words were strange and intimate, and I felt uneasy. If my husband were still here, I'd want him to keep his distance from her. Nancy radiated a charm that felt intrusive and almost threatening. Sitting beside me, she poured and sipped wine while chatting as we were old friends.
My husband left for another woman too,
she said, as though we were simply sharing stories. I explained that my husband had passed away due to a workplace accident. Nancy's eyes widened with interest.
So, was it workman's compensation?
Yes, I replied, then tried to change the subject, feeling uncomfortable. But Nancy pressed on.
Come on, tell me more.
Her insistence felt odd, and I tried to pull away. Why would someone be so invested in a stranger's loss? It felt intrusive, and I wondered if it was simply morbid curiosity. Nancy continued sharing details about her past with surprising candor.
My husband was so in love with me that he ran away with me, but after marriage, he left me in debt. After the divorce, I had to support Sarah alone. I even dated wealthy men just to get by.
She seemed to be implying that since I shared my story, I owed her a full account. I didn't want to tell her anymore, especially not about losing my husband. I couldn't just laugh about something so personal, especially with someone I just met. Later, once the wedding was over and life settled, I brought up Nancy with Ken over the phone. Sarah's mom, Nancy, she has an unusual energy. Ken laughed knowingly, sensing my discomfort.
That's one way to put it. I know what you mean, Mom. Nancy's got a bit of a nightlife vibe, if you know what I mean.
I chuckled at Ken's apt description, as it perfectly captured Nancy's aura.
I've heard from Sarah that her mom's had several relationships with rich men.
Well, I know how tough it is to raise a child alone, so I don't judge her for that. I understood the difficulties of single parenting, and in a way, it made sense for her to seek financial stability. Ken continued.
Nancy's personality made it hard for her to settle down. When I visited her house, there were designer bags all over. Guess she's had a lot of gifts.
I felt a pang of admiration, but also curiosity. Wow, she's really lived life on her terms.
You're kind of like that too, Mom. You're always calm and comforting.
I'd often heard that calming is a polite word for people without enough interesting traits to compliment. Still, I appreciated Ken's insight and dropped the subject, though something still didn't sit right. A short time later, Ken asked again about living together, surprising me with his persistence.
I'm still serious about living together one day, Mom.
I told you, as long as I'm able to live independently, there's no need. I wondered why he was so insistent. Although I was happy he wanted to be close, I wasn't sure that living together was a good idea. I thought about the challenges of blending households, especially with Sarah's personality and her mother's presence. I was about to reiterate my stance when Ken spoke up again.
It's not just me, Mom. Sarah actually wants you to live with us too.
Sarah? She wants me there?
Yes. She says she's always wanted a big, close family, so she's excited to have you with us.
This didn't make sense to me. Why would Sarah want her mother-in-law moving in instead of her own mother? I decided I needed to talk to Sarah directly to understand her intentions. That weekend, Ken and Sarah visited, and Sarah seemed prepared for a discussion.
The truth is, I grew up missing that big family feeling. Ken and I both did, actually.
She explained that she wanted to create a close-knit family-like atmosphere to make up for her childhood.
If you lived with us, it would help me feel that family bond I've always wanted.
Ken nodded in agreement, saying he understood the appeal of a big family. I could see that Sarah was sincere, and it softened my resolve. I thought about it and realized that Sarah's family-oriented dreams were very genuine. All right, I'll move in with you both, but let's agree it's a trial period, and if things get too stressful, we'll consider other options. They both accepted my conditions with enthusiasm. I felt fulfilled as a mother, seeing their happiness, unaware of the darker reasons behind Sarah's eagerness. For a while after moving in, I enjoyed a cozy, lively household. It was the first time since losing my husband that I had felt this warmth. Sarah was attentive, always ready with a warm drink of a quiet kindness, and Ken was delighted to have us all together. However, one day I felt increasingly sick. I had to leave work early with stomach issues and fatigue that only seemed to worsen. I thought back to what I'd eaten or drunk recently, trying to make sense of it. Then I remembered that every drink Sarah had made me, coffee, tea, even water, had left me feeling strange. At first I dismissed it, consuming it was my own health taking a turn. But one night, I noticed a faint, strange smell coming from the hot water Sarah had poured for me. It was subtle, almost medicinal, like a herbal supplement. Sarah watched me closely as I took a cautious sip, and my heart raced. Her presence suddenly felt intrusive, like she was monitoring my reaction. My body stiffened, and I put down the drink, saying I'd take it to bed. Once in my room, I tried to stay calm, but a strong sense of dread came over me. My stomach churned as I sat alone, clutching the cup. Why was Sarah's behavior, which seemed so caring, suddenly make me feel so uneasy? I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The next day, I left work early again, feeling too weak to continue. As I got home, I was startled to hear Sarah speaking on the phone in the living room.
Mom, I've been trying to mask the taste, but she's starting to notice.
I froze. Sarah's words were chilling. Mask the taste? Notice what? Peeking around the corner, I saw her on a video call with Nancy.
Don't worry, just be patient. She'll be too weak to ask questions soon.
My blood ran cold. Was this really happening? I backed away quietly, my heart pounding, then hurried to the front door and left without making a sound. I went straight to the police, trying to stay calm as I explained what I'd overheard. They listened, though I could see the skepticism in their faces.
Ma'am, are you saying Nancy is poisoning you?
I know it sounds outlandish, but please. She mentioned masking the taste and weakening me. I fought back tears of frustration as they looked at me unconvinced. I was terrified, desperate for someone to believe me. Just as they were turning me away, an older officer walked over, looking curious.
Ma'am, did you say Nancy was involved? Could you describe her?
I described her, and his face hardened.
Nancy's been involved in several scams. She's been investigated for financial fraud and deception in romantic relationships.
A shiver ran down my spine as he explained.
Nancy's known for manipulating people, especially if there's financial gain involved. This might be harder to prove, but if you suspect your drinks are tampered with, you could bring us a sample.
Oh, thank you. I'll try. I went home, more determined than ever to find out what Sarah and Nancy were planning. That night, I pretended everything was fine, though my hands shook as I prepared dinner. Later, when Sarah brought me my usual evening tea, I discreetly poured it into a container. I hid the container in my bag, hoping to bring it to the police the next day. Sarah watched me, her eyes narrowed.
How are you feeling? Still feeling tired?
Just a little. I'm sure it'll pass. She gave a sly smile that sent a shiver down my spine. The next day, as soon as I could, I took this tea sample to the police station. The officer who had recognized Nancy accepted it, promising to look into it further. I felt a mix of relief and fear, knowing that I'd finally shared my suspicions. That night, Ken seemed concerned as I carefully broached the subject with him. Ken, have you noticed anything unusual about Sarah's behavior?
What do you mean?
I hesitated, not wanting to upset him. I think she might be hiding things from us. I don't want to believe it, but please, just stay cautious. Ken looked troubled, but nodded. I knew it would be hard for him to accept, but I felt he needed to be on guard, even if he couldn't know everything just yet. The following morning, I woke up to Sarah knocking on my bedroom door with a cheerful voice.
Good morning. I made breakfast today. Come on, you should eat to keep your strength up.
I was immediately suspicious. As I entered the kitchen, I saw a plate with what looked like scrambled eggs, toast, and a glass of orange juice. Sarah watched me as I sat down. I picked up the glass, but a faint smell, almost medicinal, wafted from it. Just as I was about to take a sip, Ken entered the room looking unusually alert.
Hey, I actually want to try some of that juice too.
Oh, of course. Let me pour you a glass.
She quickly took the glass from my hand and went to the kitchen to pour another one. Ken looked at me, his expression intense, as if he was aware of more than I'd realized. I didn't know if I could fully trust him, but I nodded subtly, acknowledging his presence. When Sarah returned with 2 glasses of juice, she handed one to me and one to Ken, who held it up, sniffing it casually before taking a sip.
Tastes great.
His tone was overly enthusiastic, almost performative, and Sarah's smile faltered. I took a small sip, then set the glass down, pretending to finish my food. As soon as I could, I slipped away to pour the juice into another container to take to the police. That afternoon, Ken approached me in private.
Mom, is there something I should know about Sarah and her mother?
I hesitated, but decided he deserved to know the truth. Ken, I overheard Sarah talking to Nancy about weakening me. I think they're trying to get access to my finances. Ken's eyes widened, and he seemed caught between disbelief and anger.
Are you sure?
I've even brought samples of my drinks to the police. They're testing them now. Ken looked at the ground, processing what I told him.
I can't believe it, but I believe you, Mom.
For the first time, I felt a wave of relief. Later that night, Ken and I agreed to confront Sarah together, but carefully. We'd wait for confirmation from the police before taking any drastic action. A few days later, the police contacted me. They had found a mild but consistent trace of a laxative-like substance in my drinks. I was instructed to gather further evidence carefully and keep my son informed. That evening, as Sarah was preparing tea, I noticed her slipping something from her pocket into the drink. I calmly reached for my phone and took a discreet photo, saving it as evidence. After she handed me the tea, I thanked her and set it aside, pretending I'd drink it later. I had what I needed to bring to the police, and Ken was becoming more suspicious by the day. The next morning, when Ken and I finally confronted Sarah, her reaction was shockingly calm.
Why would I want to hurt you? We're family, aren't we?
Ken spoke up, his voice firm.
Sarah, Mom overheard you and Nancy, and the police tested the drinks. They found traces of something that shouldn't be there.
For a moment, I saw her mask slip, her eyes flashing with anger.
Fine. You've always been suspicious of me, haven't you? Well, I don't need this.
She stormed out, and I could see a mix of betrayal and hurt in Ken's face. He looked at me, clearly shaken.
Mom, I'm sorry. I should have noticed something sooner.
Ken, it's not your fault. I'm just glad you're safe. Sarah's actions led to a police investigation, and eventually Nancy was also implicated for her involvement in past fraud cases. Ken and I decided to live together for a while, supporting each other through the emotional aftermath. We both learned a hard lesson about trust and the importance of standing together as family. From then on, I vowed to live cautiously and cherish every moment, knowing how fragile trust could be.